mean, all that given around how important the CIO role is, it sounds like you're all saying that actually they need different skills nowadays. We're talking about organisational change skills and translation to the business skills. Talk to a lot of people about still struggling with modernising their existing technology landscape to be able to transform for the future, building tomorrow's enterprise. Can we talk for a second about sort of consuming new digital technologies that help take you forwards, and perhaps some of the baggage that organisations might be carrying? Are you guys, is that still true? Are organisations still struggling with legacy technologies and infrastructures, and how is that either limiting, or are you over that now? Perhaps we could start with you.
Yeah, sure. I think every company's got a degree of technical debt. I think it's just the nature of the beast, unfortunately. I've been, able to overcome it in the last two organisations I've worked with by just telling stories, and being able to give the board a different view of different assets that you may purchase, where actually you would have to run and maintain it. I came from a logistics business with airplanes. I said we wouldn't spend £150 million on an airplane without actually maintaining it, because something bad would happen. It would fall out of the sky, it would stop working. Well, a server is no different, a business software is no different. And they could really understand the concept of actually what we need to do with the plane, so it helped them understand the concept of what we need to do with our IT estate. So I've always looked at where can I actually draw something from a real part of their everyday life, and actually translate it to something within the technology space that they really don't understand, and they shouldn't need to understand. That's our job. But it's helping them understand the challenges, and so far, touch wood, that technique has worked. And as we're moving to the cloud now, that becomes even more challenging for the legacy estate, because it's now been done to us and we're paying a price. So actually showing the commercial model difference between a cloud model where it's always on, it's an OPEX model, rather than a traditional capital investment model, run it dry, take the depreciation holiday, sweat the asset. You can't do that in a cloud environment.
Yes,
and so those, being able to educate them in advance of getting to a period of pain is something I think we all need to take on board.
It's almost like it keeps you honest, isn't it?
It does keep you honest.
But I think it is. So one of the things that you need to change the conversation around is actually with finance. So how you communicate what you're investing in and how that's done. So we've moved to an objective-based budgeting in the last year, which is basically not budgeting by projects. So if you imagine the fallacy of budgeting by projects, means you will come up, you spend hours and hours trying to define next year in the middle of November, I'm going to spend 159,333 pence on this particular project, and I know exactly that that's right. And then you go off and promise to everyone that that's what you're going to spend, and then you don't spend it, you spend more or you spend less, and then everyone starts getting frustrated with the whole process. And you end up, delays cause havoc in the budget because everything starts to shift around in an uncontrollable way. So some organisations have done this, but I found this is it's probably one of the hardest things to do, actually, to get people to buy into that investment in areas, that investment in, we don't really sell products as such, we sell services, and professional services companies have a slightly different view, but I actually think services are a better way to look at than products, because products tend to have you tend to think of this as a product, or that's a product, or something that's physical, whereas if you're investing in something, it's not about building it once and then leaving it alone. As you said, you need to think about what's the ongoing model that allows that product to thrive. And when you look at many services, everything from buying subscriptions to buying cars is changing into leasing type models. Mm-hmm. So that changes your business as well. So you have to think differently about how you're funding and financing your investments, because that conversation actually does create very interesting conversations at the high level of companies. They start to see why they're doing things in a certain way, and everything gets easier once you get to that point, and you spend a lot less time pointlessly thinking up numbers to do projects which you may or may not do. I think that's a fundamental enabler that allows you to then shape, I guess, how you think about your role in the company.
So needing actually the skills to be able to talk to the finance CFO or lead to be able to convince them of the merits of what you're doing, in ROI type terms, results type. You talk
Yeah,
about objective type budgeting.
You need to be able to some extent, you need to be able to speak the language of the finance director. He needs to understand how what he gets for his money, how you're returning on that investment, what's the NPV of these things.
So we're already
all that
saying
stuff.
that CIOs or technology leaders are translators to business, people dealing with change. Now they're financial gurus, or at least being able to talk the language.
Don't call me a financial guru, please God.
They're chameleons, that's
chameleons,
sure.
Absolutely. Tom, from your perspective, I mean, how are you seeing that play out in your organisation? What do you think that that CIOs have to do around convincing the business that they've got a good value to bring and that they can contribute to that, and what are the skills needed to be able to do that?
I think from a retail perspective, obviously, the proof is a little bit easier, right? Because the colleague experience is improved. You can see it. You can feel it, okay? The customer experience is improved. You can see it. You can feel it. But when you talk about, convincing the business, the value, right, of what you're doing, right? I love the plane analogy. In fact, I'm going to steal it, right? But, when you talk about customer experiences, you can easily dream that up, right? Or you can easily help convey that story of why, right, that change should be done, why it should be enabled, because everything that we do in retail these days is all about that personalized experience, right? So anything that can help you, right, be closer, right, to the customer without being creepy, and it's a fine line, right? Anything that helps you be closer, okay, is actually something that you can test and learn into, right? We're not, just like we were mentioning, projects are dead, right? We're really talking about outcomes, and I would take a step back and say, we need to start organizations down that path if they're not already down it, right? The concept of agile. Agile is really a dirty word, but let's be very specific. Iterative delivery, right? Iterative delivery is really key, okay, to today's sort of technology organization. Whether or not you're agile, however you want to define it, iterative delivery is definitely needed, right, when you're talking about big, massive programs of change, right? And already ripping off the airplane analogy, you don't build an airplane in one iteration and say it'll fly, right? You build it, you have multiple stage gates, you have multiple tests, right? So when you talk about the modern, like, convincing the business, you're building into it, right? The business is with you, right? So you're on that journey together.
And are you seeing that there is still challenges for you with legacy technology and infrastructure that you're having to deal with? Is that still a thing, or are we past all of that now?
I think raise your hand if you have a mainframe, right? I think everybody's got a mainframe, right? Absolutely, everybody has legacy technology. The question is whether or not you're able to sustain your innovation on the legacy technology, whether or not you're able to operate on your legacy technology, right? We can talk about cloud, we can talk about hybrid, we can talk about all these sorts of new pieces of infrastructure, but we can't sell that. We're going to have a hard time selling that to the business if it doesn't, if you can sustain your pace of innovation, if you can sustain your operations on what you have.
Yeah.
Building on that point, if you don't mind me jumping in, is visibility of that. So many organizations don't actually know what they have because, let's face it, the CIO role maybe is a 2, 3, 4, 5 year role these days. You've got changes of staff, that technical debt we've talked about already. The knowledge, the institutional knowledge of the systems is just not there. And what's worse is often folks don't even know how many systems they have underpinning various different platforms, or how many. If I was to ask all you around the table, exactly how many devices do you have on your network? Probably wouldn't be able to answer exactly, right? And so I'm seeing a trend towards.
I would.
Right. Well, maybe you're a customer.
Exception of one.
But how up to date is that data? So it's that challenge of, in this kind of evolving world that's based on perhaps a bedrock of some legacy systems plus hybrid and other things, how do you actually keep in near real time on top of everything that's going on in order to, be confident in the operations for one thing, but then better build on that to create those new experiences for customers?
You have to think about how that sounds though to other members of the board. So if you go into a board meeting and someone asks you, how many servers do we have? No idea. There's lots of them though. There's lots of them. Lots of data centers. There's lots of stuff. Lots of wires coming out of them as well.
They don't sound very credible.
Some of them have got names. Some of them haven't. It isn't. If you think about the diligence of how that sounds to the rest of the board, that doesn't put you in a good position. I think you have to. I mean, I guess we should talk about data at some point, but it's not just customer data, but the data is the way to both sound confident at the board and also have, that you could never lose an argument when you're backed up by data. Right? So you can have a discussion about things, but you can't prove that something that's true is not true. So you use that as a basis to then it helps you define what things you need to do and invest in. So if you do have data centers which you're not quite clear on what's in there, and there's been 15 years of legacy, everyone understands that, but they also need to understand that probably all of their fingerprints are on that problem. It's not just because the CIO didn't look after it. It wasn't driven to think about, well, why would we not keep on top of that? Why would we not want to know? How did we let this happen?
It's a really important point, because they should be ashamed of themselves not asking the question.
Yeah.
How do we keep current regulated compliance with all the different legislations around there? And so what do you need to do? And I think it's flip it around. I don't talk about boxes and wires. I talk about the outcomes. And one of the principles we agree is we're going to run on supported systems. Whether that's a mainframe, whatever box in the cloud, it doesn't matter. It's the most optimal cost and a service at the right SLA. That's the outcome I'm trying to drive. How you deliver it, it's irrelevant.
Agreed. I mean, I've had those conversations as well. When I joined Control Risk, we had major issues with infrastructure and availability of just basic services. So the conversation for me was actually quite easy, because I said, right, we're going to get off this tin. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, I started having conversations about, look, the IT team need to focus on the outcome, what the business value is, delivering products, rather than tinkering with tin. That's really, not going to provide a lot of value. So for me, it was actually quite easy. We moved into the cloud and we're just about done. So we've seen, the transformation that the IT function went through, but also the outcome of the business. We don't worry about all those basic issues. I don't have to go to the CFO and say we need more investment for servers, because they hate having that conversation.
Yeah.